A stronger day, be your best every day. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. I aim to help you stay healthy, be happier, and deal with challenges with greater resilience. Do you love your job? Do you find your work meaningful? What can you do to experience more meaning in what you do? Today, you will meet Professor Michael Steger from Denver, Colorado. Michael will show you how you can create more meaning in what you do and your work with 5 simple strategies. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strength Optimizer. Thank you for watching Strength Optimizer's The Science Up Your Wellbeing series. Today, we have Professor Michael Steger joining us from Denver, Colorado. Michael is a recognized authority on meaning in life, happiness, psychological strengths, and positive psychology. He is a founder and director for the Center for Meaning and Purpose, and also a professor of psychology at the Colorado State University. Michael's passion is about helping people to achieve flourish and well-being, but also he's curious and passionate about how people create a life worth living. I'm so grateful that you can join us today, Michael. How are you doing?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Adimus. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an interesting question. How are you doing in the year 2021? But healthy, so things are good. My family's healthy. I'm healthy. We're getting through.
Absolutely. And sounds like you're continuing to engage to do what you're passionate about, what you enjoy doing too, which is in the areas, obviously, of positive psychology, meaning in life and purpose.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting year for positive psychology, I think, to see whether we collectively can innovate and step up to be helpful when so much is in crisis.
Absolutely. So again, thank you for taking your time to share with us your research and applications on a very specific topic of meaning, which is meaning at work, or what we call the meaningful work. So as a start, Michael, how do you define meaningful work?
So meaningful work is going to be defined through the lens of an individual person's experience. And I want to start off with that idea because one of the pieces of heritage that the idea of meaningful work and calling brings with it is that it's more about the job itself than it is about the person's experience.
Yeah.
So I was a counselor for a while, as a therapist for a while, and if you ask people, is that a meaningful job, they would say yes.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it was less meaningful for me than doing research was, and no one says being a psychology researcher is a meaningful job, but for me it was. So that's why I want to start off with that idea that the way I approach meaningful work is that it can be found in any line of work, and that's really where the field has gone lately. So then it's an individual person's own judgment that the work that she or he is doing is personally important, impactful on the world around them, and also that it uses their abilities or talents to create identifiable outcomes of value.
Yep. Thank you. And sounds like, I guess, a move away from the traditional definition of meaningful work, which, as you talk about, is more related to the job attributes. Obviously, we will have all our perceptions of what kind of jobs are more meaningful than others. And traditionally speaking, healthcare, like doctors and nurses, or teachers, are more meaningful than, I will name some other jobs who I would consider less meaningful. But I guess it sort of boils down to our individual perception, our experience, and our attributions to what we actually see the job or the occupation, even the career, meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it puts the person, each individual person, in a position of then being able to find ways of making work more meaningful instead of trying to find that meaningful job. And I think one of the potential pitfalls of meaningful work and calling is that, well, there's two. One is, as society, oftentimes the jobs that we are told are most meaningful are the ones that are the worst paid and least secure. So society charges society treats meaning as if it's part of the benefits package instead of paying a fair way. So people who are engaged then in meaningful work oftentimes have more burden and are overworked and may even be more prone to burnout than someone doing non-meaningful work, because there's all the other stressors that come along with not having sufficient support. And then the other piece is that sometimes people get into a line of work that they assume would be very, very meaningful, and it doesn't feel right for them. And so then what are they supposed to do? And if it's all about the job and not the person, then they're stuck and they start to blame themselves, and that can increase burnout itself too. So that's why I prefer this approach.
Okay. Yeah. So based on your definition, on your approach, and your research, so what gives our work meaning then? You know, apart from obviously some of them will talk about incomes or social status or influence or the impact. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I looked at the research a number of years ago and wanted to come up with a sort of like a checklist of things that people could look for, or that they could spend attention on changing to increase their experience of meaningful work. And I called that SPIRE.
SPIRE,
SPIRE.
Okay.
And the first one is a positive psychology favorite, and that's strengths.
All right, yes.
So having the chance to use your strengths at work is a strong predictor of meaningful work, even more so than being able to identify your strengths. It's actually being able to use them in the work.
Okay.
And for that one, my personal story is that I have strengths of curiosity and kindness, but I'm also a bit of an introvert. So working as a counselor, I was able to be curious, and I tried to be kind and empathic, but I was just tired all the time. So the switch to being a researcher helped me, because I could be curious and I enjoy learning, and I wasn't under as much social demand. And so I really used my strengths in a different way, and found the professor life and career very meaningful.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So there's an alignment. There's alignment again.
I use my strengths and I don't overuse underdeveloped strengths.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. So that's S, strengths. Yep. Yeah. And the next is P.
Yeah. Another thing I must say it. I'm sorry, could you say again?
I think the next word is P, the letter P. The letter, because the first one is strengths. Yep.
A good focal point for P. So P stands for personalization. And a good focal point for P is values. So, but you could also think of, if you're familiar with, self-determination theories, emphasis on intrinsic motivation, and then Ken Sheldon's work on self-concordance.
Yeah.
This idea that you're bringing yourself, your good inner self, to what you do. So sometimes that's personality. So for me, the introversion was rough. Also the conscientiousness. I'm very low on conscientiousness, so keeping paperwork was hard work.
Yeah.
But then my values meant that I needed to still find a way to be helpful, or at least do what I consider to be good work. And so I wanted to study meaning, and I wanted to make a big part of my career trying to make it useful.
Yeah.
So that people could make positive change in the world. So that was a way for me to personalize my role as a professor. And I take the same attitude towards teaching. Yep. So I think that I really want to positively impact my students' lives, as that's as important as learning to me. So that helps keep my job meaningful. So that's personalizing.
Yeah. Excellent. Sounds to me, again, I can think about this more like an internal compass to keep adjusting the, hey, and this is truly what matters for me, that I'm knowing I'm making an impact or significant contributions.
Yeah. And I was I was trained in a person environment fit model of career development at the University of Minnesota, where the strong interest inventory was developed and so on. And so that idea of finding a healthy ecosystem for each person is important. So the I stands for integration. And this is where we start looking at things like, well, I heard this phrase for the first time in Singapore, and it was work-life harmony, not
All
work-life
right.
balance, work-life harmony.
Harmony. Yeah.
Because work and life are now like an orchestra. Everything's happening all at once. You can't just have, I'm going to work now, I'm going to live now. It's all happening at once. So they really talked about this notion of harmony.
Yeah.
And in that sense, then the eye of the integration of work into your life should be good for both. So my work, like I've never had a career plan really. I've never had a vision of what my career would be.
Yeah.
But I have had a vision of what my life would be. And so
yeah,
every career choice had to be good with my life. And that was just, so that's maybe an extreme example, but you can find ways to make your work an expression of other important pieces of your life, such as your life purpose.
Yeah, yeah. Which again, we will talk about it a little bit later in terms of, I guess, the impact of meaning at work and meaning in life in general, and the correlation between two. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the R stands for resonance, and this takes a little detective work. So if you're lucky enough to start your own business, then you get to set the mission in place and the purpose. But if you work for a big employer like a university, they have a purpose and a mission and a set of values. And your work is on behalf of that organization. So it is more meaningful for you if you can be excited and find resonance with the purpose, mission, and values of the organization that you're working for.
Yeah.
So that part of it is, if you can resonate with what the organization that you are working for, what it's all about, that'll fill you with a sense of meaning because you're part of something bigger than yourself, doing good in the world.
Yeah. So collectively together. Yes.
Yeah. And sometimes that takes work. So for example, my university has an official mission statement that no one knows and doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. Should I ask you what is that? Sorry.
Yeah, they want to be essentially. It's a perfect example of one of those like consultant-driven purpose statements. It's to be the premier land-grant university system in the U.S. and the world. It's like it's never going to happen. I mean, it's never going to happen. So no one even pays any attention to it.
Yeah.
But there's many missions and there's many values. So one of the big values of my university is to make world-class education accessible to first-generation college students and people who usually don't access that. So I love that idea. So that part I resonate with.
Yeah.
The other part, not so much.
That's right.
Yeah. And then finally, the last one is E for expansion. And this is where you can start to think of your work as having ripple effects. So if I was to define my personal work, it's typing. The job of a professor is clicking and typing.
Yeah.
So that doesn't do any good. So then I have to see, well, what am I typing? I'm typing research reports, or I'm typing theory reviews, or even emails. But I want those to have an impact. So I want to think about what I can do with the labor of my job can do good work in the world beyond me. So you're expanding your horizons to find ways to work towards broader benefits or the greater good.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's like making connections to either the immediate spheres of influence, to broader community implications, and maybe even the global impact as well, and the ability to make the connections, see that a job is not just a technical aspect, but it's far more than that. As I said, not just typing and clicking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's all so all of that is backed up in correlation in little ways in longitudinal or experimental research. But it's just a convenience to keep things straight.
I like that SPIRE. So let me put myself in the hot seat. So S stands for strengths, which is applying our strengths in our work. P stands for personalization, which means making an alignment in terms of what matters to us, especially aligned with our values. And I stands for integration, knowing that work and life, they are not segregated. They're always going to go hand in hand. It's a dynamic of positive tension that we all need to, I guess, that juggle with and dance with perhaps. And then R is resonance, especially as you mentioned earlier, if you're working in the large organizations, the more we'll be able to make connection and resonate with the, whether it's a broader vision and mission statements, then the more excited and energized that we're going to be when you show up at work. And finally, E stands for expansions. Again, making connections from our immediate job roles or position description to a broader impact. Did I get it right?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes forget them, so I'm really impressed that that you know them better than I do, I think, sometimes. So yeah.
Because I learned from the master. Thank you, Michael. All right, I think that is really a great framework for us to not just to contemplate, but also to play with experiments, how we can actually make our work more meaningful, especially knowing from the research, it's not so much so of the job itself, but a lot of times based on our individual experience, as I mentioned earlier, and our perceptions as well. Sometimes I just wondering, like when we talk about meaning at work, is meaning a luxury for certain cohorts of population of people, especially for people who are struggling to meet ends meet financially, or maybe even for people who are made redundant or unemployed, especially during this pandemic. So many people have lost their jobs. So just wondering whether that meaning at work applies to everyone, and keen to know your feedback again.
I think the answer is one of those yes and no types of answers. It's a really great question. One of my appointments is at a university in South Africa. And when I would give lectures or teach down there, it's, because I'm in North America, so it seems down, even though the world doesn't have up down like that. But, when I'd go to South Africa, the country had over 50% unofficial unemployment rate, particularly among the young. So finding a job that would pay and be consistent was really an achievement, and a very difficult and challenging one. Yeah. So then for someone like me from a wealthy country to say, and you should also have meaningful work, or to imply somehow that if you had an opportunity to work but it didn't seem meaningful, you shouldn't take it. I think that's not a healthy approach. I think that so to say that it's a necessity probably overstates things.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think there's plenty of people who find a lot of reasons to keep working and be fine with that, whether they think their work is meaningful or not. I would say, though, the other side of that is that when people have done research in what you might call low status occupations, they find that a percentage of folks find it to be really meaningful.
Yeah.
So one example is from one of our students at our university. The United States, we have very huge stores with very huge parking lots, where there's lots of room to park cars, and people will bring their shopping carts full of
the trolley here.
Yeah, the trolley. And they'll leave them, and a parking lot in the United States can be a kilometer wide, sometimes more, and at these big stores. And so one of our students interviewed people who worked as the person who goes and gets the trolleys and brings them back to the store. They're out there when it's raining, when it's snowing, when it's 38 degrees. The carts are all over the place, and it's a beginner job. And what she found in her research was that a minority, but still 30 or 40% of people who had that job found it to be meaningful in some way in their lives. So I think we want to avoid saying that you have to have meaningful work. And I also think we want to avoid saying, but only some people with some types of jobs get to think about it. Because I think anyone who works, if the concept of meaning is important to them, wants to find a way for whatever work they have to be an enriching part of their lives. And a lot of people will do that, whether we help them or not. So I think that we want to balance both pieces.
Yeah, yeah. Really great to hear that. Sounds like a meaning at work. It's not, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. The way I'm thinking is it's not something that we actually describe that you must have meaning in your work. Not only you're going to experience a flourishing, abundant life, but also acknowledging that there are different needs, there are different situations, circumstances. I ask the questions basically based on a personal experience. I mean, coming from what you call a lower social economic status for myself as a family. When my grandparents, my dad, they as far as I'm concerned, they didn't enjoy their work at all. They work because they had to. They work because they want to provide the essential basic needs for their family. But I guess perhaps that's what gives them motivation and meaning, knowing that whatever I'm doing right now, I'm actually investing into my children's, and I'm also the first generations of college or university graduates, which I'm really grateful. So yes, I guess it's important to acknowledge that yes, we can find meaning at work, and it's actually accessible to all because it's subjected to our personal interpretations. But yet at the same time, understanding that it's not a must-have ingredient in order to have a flourishing life. I guess that's my take.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think the more that I reflect on meaningful work is I think of it as that work is like diet. It's like nutrition.
Yeah.
And meaningful work is like fresh vegetables, like nice fresh vegetables. At one point, when it's possible to imagine that if everyone in a village somewhere in the world was in human history was working together to raise crops and to eat what was the food that they grew themselves, and that they would, if there was surplus, they could save some for the next year and they could bring some to market to trade for goods. Like there's at least a romantic notion of that type of economy around these fresh vegetables that they would consume because that's what was grown there. That there's something about that has layers of depth. There's tradition, there's family, there's bonding together, there's working for a community, there's having nutritious food instead of garbage food. So you can imagine that maybe an approach to work that can somehow shut out the highly competitive, materialistic, voracious capitalism would have something of that traditional we're all in this together feel. Now, however, it seems like everyone's supposed to eat fresh vegetables. Like we all want the best diet, and we know it's healthy, and we know that over time we'll live longer, we'll be better off physically, we will have fewer health problems. Meaningful work is like that. It's not the only thing you can eat, and you can if you don't have access to fresh vegetables, you shouldn't hate yourself for it. But it is better for you in the long run to have meaningful work like fresh vegetables than to have garbage food. And I'll just also say this analogy works in one more way. It would be better for the whole world if we ate vegetables instead of fast food hamburgers and garbage and factory food and all the. It would be better for all of us if that was easy, if that was an easy choice. But we make the easy choice collectively. Work that's unhealthy to us, and work that's unhealthy for the planet and each other. So I think that's the analogy that I've come to think through.
I'm learning something new again, Michael. I'm going to steal it from you next time when I talk to someone about vegetables and meaning at work.
Oh yes, vegetables for sure. I know at least two types. So yeah, carrots and the other one. Yeah.
Broccoli?
Broccoli, yes.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. I also know that you've done quite a fair bit of work of developing inventory to measure meaning at work. Can you just walk us through a little bit more? How do we actually measure meaning at work?
Well, you have a lot of different choices. I think that because my training was in measurement, I tend to evaluate surveys and things like that based on the psychometrics, so their ability to function reliably and validly. And that's not the only way you can do this. I mean, you can assess meaningful work through interviews, through storytelling, through open-ended questions and all that sort of stuff. But the the questionnaires I gravitate towards are ones that are solid instruments. And so I've been a part of developing some of those. One is the work and meaning inventory. Another I developed with my colleague Brian Dick is called the calling and vocation questionnaire. And they're solid tools. They do the job that they're supposed to do, and they're reliable. They're limited because they don't tell you everything you'd want to know in a conversation with someone about work. They just spit out a score. Is your work meaningful or not? More or less. But there's also a really good one by Douglas May that was published in a very influential article on motivation at work. It doesn't really have a name, but it's quite widely used. He's at Kansas University in the United States, but it's got very nice items also. So that's sort of the typical approach a researcher wants to take, which is, give me a good, solid, reliable instrument where I know that the score means, even if it misses a lot of really interesting stuff.
That's good. So it sounds like they've got a number of options, and I know that if people are interested with the meaning of inventory, they can visit your website as well, which I will mention that at the end of the interview. Earlier on, we talked about the SPIRE model, which is more of our roles or motivations. How can we make our job more meaningful? What about for an organizations or leaders in organizations? What can they do to create a more meaningful workplace?
Yes, well, I came up with another set of letters for that.
I love acronym.
Yeah, this might be, we might be getting into a very long conversation to try and get me to remember all of these. But I would just say that, so this one's called CARMA, but it's spelled with a C, not a K, because I couldn't make it work. But I'll be really brief about this one. But so the overall view of trying to develop an organization that is friendly to meaningful work, I would just say that the main lesson is that the leaders have to build it in and take responsibility for it from top to bottom. So it can't be left up to accident. It can't be just a purpose statement that someone finds deep in the web pages. And it can't be something that a rational employee would decide doesn't matter. So for example, if the everyday work has nothing to do with meaning, then to operate effectively and feel competent, an employee is going to learn how to do the operations that matter. And if meaning doesn't matter, they'll stop paying attention. Likewise, if there's this big, beautiful mission statement and an inspiring founder who says, we're the company that, for example, like Google, we do no evil. I think they've gotten rid of that now, but, and then you don't get a raise if you don't do evil, and you don't get penalized if you do evil in Google. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that doesn't matter because your performance isn't evaluated that way either. So I would say, like, it's really important for leaders to take responsibility. You can't be cynical as a leader about it because employees will figure it out. And it has to actually be implemented into how employees will do their jobs. And so the CARMA piece that I came up with was C for clarity of purpose. So have a purpose and then communicate for how that affects the way that business is done in your organization so that people can see it's a living thing. The second one is authenticity of the leadership. So leadership has to believe it and they have to be ethical. They can't be, a scammer and say, ooh, I've got a good purpose for you. Then the third one is respect. I know there's a lot of emphasis on quality connections and good relationships in workplaces. I'm nervous about that, maybe because I'm an introvert. I don't think I want to go to work with my friends because friends need a lot from me that I don't want my coworkers to need. And they want to know, my friends know a lot about me that I don't want my coworkers to know. So I think respect is just the foundation for effective work relationships. So I focus on respect. The M stands for mattering. And I would just advise managers, leaders, supervisors, and founders that you're the one who decided that you needed a new employee. and you know why that employee is important to your organization. Your employee is showing up to do work, but you don't want to leave the role of the employee up to the guess work of the employee. So every employee needs to know that they matter and how they matter. And that's the job of leaders and managers. So I will tell my employees, you matter. You're so important to this organization because you do these things, and I see it and I appreciate it, and we want you to keep working on that area. You know, not go read the mission statement and figure it out for yourself. And then the final one is autonomy. And, you know, that's going to be different depending on the security and precision needs of an organization. But for the most part, people feel work is more meaningful if they get to do all the SPIRE stuff. You know, if they can shape it themselves, and you're not just hiring a robot with a human body to do some work that a machine could do. So
yeah. Wonderful. That's another piece of acronym for leaders in organizations who want to create a more meaningful workplace or meaning-driven workplace, which is the acronym of CARMA, which I will not attempt to expand it all. I will just test myself to see is clarity of purpose, right? Then A is authenticity, R is respect, M is mattering, like, you know, as a late Professor Chris Patterson always says, it's other people matter, and karma. And then the last A is it MA? Autonomy. Yes, it's autonomy.
Yeah, you got an impressive memory. You have a really impressive memory. Yeah, wow.
I've been listening attentively, especially during Zoom. I guess that is part of training as well, because as a counselor, obviously I enjoy face-to-face interactions, but just like everyone else could be, everything has to Zoom. Sometimes the connections may not be necessarily that great, so I have to lean in to really amplify my hearing.
Yes.
That's right. Wonderful. So I guess that for people who are struggling to find meanings in what they do, what would be your suggestion, advice for them? If they say that I don't find my work meaningful, I know that there's a lot of contextual questions or information that you need to get in order to give a precise answer. But in general, what would you tell or people who say, I really struggle in finding my work meaningful?
Yeah, well, I would say that answer the question, can you leave that work or not? If you can, start preparing to understand what kind of work would be more meaningful to you, so that you're not leaving something that's not meaningful for nothing. You're leaving something that's meaningful, that's not meaningful for either a direction or a pursuit or something that you do have a good belief would be meaningful for you. So I think patience is a key. The more that you can understand about your own levers for meaning, the more likely it is that you'll be able to either find something that's more meaningful for you, or find something that's a little more meaningful for you and make it a lot more meaningful. And so then if you prefer to stay in your current job, then or if you have to, like, it's hard to find work, so you don't want to give up work. So you want to, then I would say, like, you can do all the SPIRE pieces, you know, and try to figure out what you can change. But I would just say, try to have like a set of mad scientist glasses on, or an explorer, like, you know, someone who's like I just want you to be as curious as you can be, and just try things out and see what happens. Like, try little changes. One of the easiest places to start is to talk to people who you think do have meaningful work, and ask them to just say what works for them. And you're like, oh, well, you know, you're saying that what works for you is that you get to save lives every day at the hospital, but here I am, you know, I'm getting trolleys in the parking lot. But maybe safety and making life a little bit safer for people is a good thing. So every time I get a trolley, that's one less thing, you know, someone's gonna be distracted by when they're driving. And like, you know, so like, maybe I'll try that, you know, that just off the spot. But you can run all the suggestions and all the stories from other people through your own, what makes you tick, you know, what makes you thrive, and then just
Yeah.
try stuff. Just try stuff. Have very low bar. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I'll find out. Just like have that, try to take a little bit of lightness and a little bit of an experiment to it. And then if something works, kind of stick with it for a while.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, new idea, So
Absolutely.
I would say that that's probably approach.
That's great. That's great. Because sometimes I guess that for example, for myself, when I hear about certain suggestions or tip a strategy from an expert, I guess that the intention, if this doesn't work, that means I'm a failure. But if you put on the hat of curiosity, as you talk about the mad scientist, that this really just dancing, playing with all the different kind of possibility and options, I think they can leave out a lot of the self-judgment that just because experts say so, that means that it will definitely work. But I guess that perhaps that's not necessarily the case all the time. So to take it lightly, holding in our hands, that is a great mindset. Yeah, in other words, growth mindset, I guess, for us to continue to play with.
Yeah. I think I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because I think a lot of the expert advice that I hear in this space is not only bad, but really arrogant. Like the people who are experts, they have such small and rigid pieces of advice that I don't think they're likely to work for most people. But then they're the experts, and they've got the TED Talks, and then they get the $60,000 speaking fees. And so you're like, well, clearly everyone else thinks this is a useful bit of advice, so it should work for me. My experience of that, and maybe it's different for other people, but my experience of experts telling me the things to do is that it worked for them, and I'm not them.
Yeah.
And they don't take the time to learn who I am.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be random luck if it works for me. It's like any other thing. Like if they said, oh, you would love this dish at this restaurant, I'd be like, maybe I like spicier food than you do. Or maybe, I don't eat meat, so it's, so I think, like, I would say that if you hear advice from an expert, the expert on the power of why or whatever it could be out there, that is a story for the most part of what worked for that person and some people that person knows well. And so treat that just like the advice I gave.
Yeah.
Try it out, but if it doesn't work, it probably won't work, because it's highly contextualized. It's not based on science.
Yeah.
And it just tells a good story. So if it doesn't tell your story, it might not work for you, and that's not your fault. You're great for having your story.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, against approach with curiosity, perhaps sometimes we a little bit of cautious, healthy skepticism as well.
Yeah. And don't get fired in your mad experiments. I mean,
That's good. That's good. All right. So, Michael, just going to ask you one last question. It's got nothing to do with meaning at work. It's a little bit more personal. What is one thing that you have been doing this week to look after your well-being?
Oh, this week has been a little bit hard because it got very, very cold, and I got very, very tired, because I've been usually doing a lot of walking. So I'm a former runner, and my knee is just too bad to run anymore for the most part. And so walking, I've been trying to trick myself into liking walking as much as I used to love running. And it's just been not pleasant to be outside. So the thing that I'm mainly doing to enjoy myself is I've been giving a little bit of extra time to like silly hobbies where I learn something new, but also very useless. So I think that's like
new but useless. Okay, good.
Yeah. Like there's no pressure. Like I feel like being a meaning-oriented person, I feel like comes with enough seriousness and pressure already that when I get a chance to do something silly, I'm happy to do it. But I will also say that one of the answers is the same as ever. One of the things I will truly miss. Like I'm not a black and white thinker. I'm not an either or. I think COVID has been super horrible, and there's been something good about it. for me personally. And the good about it is that this is my last year with my son before he goes off to university.
All right.
And he was trapped in the house with us for a full year. So
lock in.
I know it was hard. He didn't get to do all these things, and it makes the university application process even more competitive. And there's a lot of suffering in the world, some of which has touched our family as well. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't also something that I can find value in. So appreciating seeing those kids around the house, appreciating seeing my partner every day, like there's something there. There's something there, even though the reason it happened is tragic. There's something there.
Yep. I guess I just remember what Lucy once said, that at times of adversity, it's so easy to put on what we call a negativity bias, which is focusing on all the horrible things. But it's also important to learn how to tune into the good as well, which is the positivity bias.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I would just add to that I just really appreciate authenticity. And part of authenticity, a lot of times you think of authenticity as owning your faults, for example, or speaking your beliefs. But authenticity is a mindset for everything. And it's not forcing something to be too simple. It's just looking at what really is there. And for me, COVID is a very long list of bad things. But if I'm really authentic and truthful about what it was, it also brought good things. So that's just every experience. Career success brings bad things. Like when I was traveling all the time in 2019 and before that was great. I loved it. I loved every second of it, but I was not around my kids at all.
Yeah.
So just be authentic, I think, and see what's really there. It's like that's what gives you the fuel to grow in life, I think.
Absolutely. Embracing everything, all the packages that life can bring.
Yes. The whole package.
That's right. Well, Michael, that's all the time that we have for today. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. And of course, for our listeners out there, if you want to engage Michael's expertise in helping individuals, organizations to create a meaning and purpose, then make sure you visit his website. I believe it's michaelfsteger.com. Just Michael with an F, Steger, STEGER.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Demus from Strength Optimizers. We are here to bring out your best by optimizing your strengths. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.